What is the best comp you can take into Gnomeregan? And I'll go over why. As you can see, all the top performers right now for the raid are melee hunters, warlocks, and mages. Specifically Fire Mage, Destro Lock, and Melee Hunter. There are a couple warriors, but these are the best warriors in the world that always top pars, so I don't really count them. So you will need, of course, these three classes in your comp, and let's go over a basic Horde comp first, and then we'll go over a couple Alliance comps, and then we'll go over what you can interchange with these comps and still make them pretty good and pretty balanced. So for the most part, the hardest boss in the raid is going to be the last boss. It's the one that most people struggle with. So we're primarily going to be building a comp around that fight. You can get to the last boss, and you can kill the last boss, or you can kill all the other bosses too. So we primarily build a comp around the last boss. Now, what makes the last boss easy is a Warlock tank. Or a Warlock DPS who's willing to go meta to handle the bombs for that particular fight. So that being said, we'll start with a one Warlock, and I feel like this is the key to the entire raid, is having one Warlock in your group that can spec into meta. To juice his damage, you're obviously going to want a Fire Mage. Fire Mage provides the best damage. What you can do to give these two more damage is you can put in a Balance Root in here, to give them 3% crit, so that will give them even more damage, and it'll provide you with a Innervate. The last boss is a really long fight, and most comps tend to struggle with mana back. To help you with mana back even more, you can put a Shaman Healer in the group. This is going to give you Mana Tide Totem, as well as Mana Spring Totem to give you MP5 back. And then, of course, you're always going to want a Discipline Priest. They're the best, some of the best overall healing. They also provide stamina buff to the group. And then they can PI your Warlock or Fire Mage depending on the fight to provide even more damage. The Group 2 comp is pretty set in stone. I'll go over a couple options to change what you can change that out in a minute. Now, the melee comp is very versatile. You can have any tank. I prefer enhancement or meta tank, but this is kind of up to you. These are interchangeable. I do like maybe a warrior off tank right now. I think a warrior off tanks are pretty solid, and since you have an enhancement tank, you don't really need a feral in the group because you're getting a Mark of the Wild from the Balance Druid. A Fury off tank who can go DPS on some fights is very good. You could sub this out with a rogue. Like I said, a meta tank is fine too. But having one plate in the raid to at least soak the plate gear and the two-handers is nice, I think. So I just like the Fury there to split up the gear a bit. Now, of course, you're going to have one hunter. So let's go ahead and put a Survival Hunter. Now, the Survival Hunter will actually be a BM Hunter. But I normally just put Survival so people know I mean like a melee hunter there. It is nice when your hunter can go ranged for the last fight in particular. Because you're going to want this Destro Lock really just handling bombs, not really clicking buttons. So the more, if you can have up to 7 range DPS in the group, it does kind of make it easier. Now, you don't need to be DPS, they can be healers. So like I would say 6 to 7 classes that can do range DPS is what's going to make your group comp ideal. Then you can place one ranged person by each button, and they can click the buttons quicker for the last boss. So for the last 2 spots in the group, hybrid range / melees are really good. You can do a Shadow Priest. You could do another Warlock for meta. You could do another hybrid Hunter. You could, at this point, you do have your 6 to 7 ranged if you have the Hunter and the Shadow Priest. So you could do a Rogue. This is kind of up to you at this point on this last slot. I just think that the most important slot is going to be your 6 to 7 ranged and 1 Warlock tank. One warlock who can at least spec tank for the last boss and just handle the bombs. The balanced druid can do a pretty good job of it, but it gets pretty messy, and I think it's why a lot of groups struggle with the last boss, is because they're not just killing the bombs quick enough. And so this does depend on whether you have a warlock tank or not too. So I'm just trying to give you some options here on what you can do with the last spots in your group. Now this would also work too if you had a warlock tank. You could throw a shadow priest in here, or you could throw a rogue in there as well to kind of break up some of the gear. But the ideal comp is going to be, like I said, at least 6 range DPS, preferably 7 if you have a warlock going meta for the last boss. That way, because there's 6 buttons on the last boss, so you'd want at least 6 people each standing by one of the buttons to make the fight a little bit more seamless. So this is the idea of a horde comp. Now let's just very briefly go over what an alliance comp would look like. You would simply change out a holy pally. You would want a holy pally tank or DPS. We'll put a tank in here for now. You want 2 paladin buffs. And the reason being is because you want salvation on all the DPS, and you want at least mana per 5 or attack power, blessing of might. So you're always going to want 2 paladins in your raid. You can do a ret, and I'll show you options for that right now, but we'll show you the paladin tank option and healer for now. Obviously these 4 slots are pretty much on lockdown, I would say. You don't need a balanced druid, but I like it for the 3% crit for these other 2 guys. And 2 healers is pretty mandatory at this point in time, with the balanced druid also kind of helping out with healing with the wild growths. So if we have another tank comp, we can kind of set it up the same. You can have your Fury Warrior be your off tank, or you can have the Feral Druid do it, because on the Alliance, you do need a Feral Druid for wild strikes. If you have melee in your group, you obviously have to have the Hunter for Kings, which is the BM Hunter. And now you have your 6 range, and the last slot here, you'd ideally want another range if your Destro is going to be going meta for the last boss, to make it a little bit easier. So in that last spot, I would probably put like a Shadow Priest, because how much utility and what they bring to the raid as far as healing and damage. That's kind of the comp, and you could swap these. Obviously you could put the Shadow Priest in this group for the DPS increase. And this is probably an ideal comp that I would do. And then one of these 2 would be tanking on all the fights that require a tank, which is first boss, Menagerie, and Thermoplug, the last boss. So you can also change this up a bit. You know, the Feral could be the tank, the Fury could just be a straight DPS. These could be your 2 melee DPS, and then the Feral provides wild strikes to your 2 melee DPS. But I at this point in time, I don't really recommend running more than 4 melee in the raid. It's not a very melee friendly raid, and you need ranged DPS to click the buttons while having uptime on damage. And the Destro won't be doing much damage to the boss, because he'll just be killing bombs on the last phase. So there's a solid idea for an alliance comp. If you guys have any questions about these comps, or why I chose anything, you can ask me in the comments, and I'll answer, or you just ask me on stream. It's probably the best thing. But tell me if this helps you guys out with when you make your comps. Some of you guys are still pugging. I know this raid is a little bit harder for a pug, but I promise if you take this, if you're Destro lock, or if you're running another Destro lock instead of a Shadow Priest, if one of them can spec into meta and just handle the bombs, and you can even make a macro /target bombs, and the meta lock can just handle all the bombs for you guys. He literally one-shots them. I promise you, this fight, the last fight, gets so remarkably easy, you're gonna wish that you took one in every raid. All right, if you like these videos, make sure to hit subscribe below, and I'll see you next time. Peace.